Hi, everyone. It's Betty here, co-founder of Acala. Yesterday, we hosted a Interprotocol aUSD distribution scheme, so IADS Twitter space, and I dropped the ball. My internet connection was so poor that I dropped off multiple times, and in the end, I couldn't actually do my part to actually answer some of the questions and also address some of the concerns for the community. So today I've fixed my internet, and then I'll do two things today. Number one, we'll do a recap of yesterday's Twitter space, highlight some of the important things of this new proposal, IADS, and what it means and what benefits that it will bring to the Acala, Karura, and wider Polkadot and Kusama ecosystem, as well as what new risks that we introduce and what things that folks need to be aware of. And the second part, which is the more important part, is I will be addressing some of the questions that are being raised that I wasn't able to answer yesterday. So first thing first, let's do a bit of recap. So as a context for the IADS proposal, so we kind of talk about Acala's aUSD hands-on protocol is effectively a decentralized credit system to facilitate liquidity for Polkadot, Kusama, multi-chain, and a wider Web3 ecosystem. And one thing to note is motivation here for the proposal is we've been through organic growth in the last wee while since we launched, and we purposely didn't incentivize minting, which was very easy and very tempting to do, but we didn't do it. Mostly because a protocol like this serving as infrastructure, it's better to kind of grow solidly, steadily, and develop real use case than to drive a lot of the hype. And there is a tension, right? So this doesn't just happen on our ecosystem; it happens on other similar protocols like Maker as well. There's a tension between how much liquidity can grow organically versus how much demand is needed in the ecosystem, especially now. The Polkadot Kusama ecosystem started to waking up or starting to, things are starting to happen as more parachains are being launched. So for example, we've connected to 20 also parachains on Kusama, 5 also on Acala, and it grows day after day, that number. So they're also increasing demand for native stablecoin, aUSD in the ecosystem. So hence, this is one of a series of proposals that we have to serve the liquidity side of the needs. And what IADS is it's a proposal to create a new issuer, a protocol-to-protocol credit issuer. Think of it high level, the current crypto over-collateralized CDP is one type of issuer, right? It has a certain arrangement to take on crypto as collateral and to be able to issue aUSD credit, and then also have a certain rules when certain risk threshold is met. The risks are being mitigated, like liquidation will happen, for example, to pay back outstanding debt. So that's one type of issuer. And then IADS as a new issuer, essentially, that we propose to introduce is a protocol-to-protocol direct deposit of aUSD liquidity, and then using the receipt token as collateral to meet the liquidity demand across the Dot-Sama ecosystem. And then we also talk a little bit about benefits. For the users, the benefit would be quite obvious as we have more liquidity available, especially in stable swap pools. So there's better trading experience, and you can also get trading with other tokens against aUSD a lot more efficient, price-wise, etc. And there will also be more liquidity for vault owners, especially in a market like this. Everyone is kind of crying for liquidity to manage their vault. So this way, there will be more aUSD available, especially we mentioned that the V0 will be a stable swap, in particular the Tiger 3 pool that are already launched on Karura currently has just over 1 million TVL. So that extra little bit of liquidity will certainly help vault owner to be able to draw some of the aUSD liquidity, pay down their loans, and it's also a new pathway for off-ramp and on-ramp from and onto crypto, right? And this also obviously will serve more trading venues for aUSD, and more trading venues, there's more arbitrage opportunity, and certainly helps better stability for aUSD as well. We also mentioned benefit for overall Acala protocol and also ACNKR holders, right? Generally, so those are effectively IADS treats protocols as distributors for aUSD liquidity, right? And then it actually develops this distributor network locally on Acala, Karura, as well as across the parachain ecosystems where the liquidity is needed. Then it will be able to, deliver those liquidity at those venues. And the protocol-to-protocol sort of way to deliver liquidity also has another benefit, is this is effectively a form of protocol-owned liquidity. It can help bootstrap liquidity more sustainably and efficiently compared to the rented liquidity model that normally employed by DEXs, right? And it also obviously will be able to generate some new revenues like via trading fees, because the receipt token is effectively a form of LP token, and the Hong Kong protocol would then actually receive trading fees via holding of these LP tokens, and also it will generally also increase utility of Acala and Karura, and then in the long run, this is actually increase real intrinsic value of ACNKR, right? So yeah, so we talk about benefit, we talk about the motivation, and then there was questions around risk, right? So right now the proposal actually suggests we have an issuance ceiling of $100,000, 100,000 aUSD to be issued, and to put it into perspective, so 100K is a fraction of the total debt ceiling, so that's 0.3% only on a Karura side. And as I also mentioned yesterday, is we also have another proposal that coming out as we're linking aUSD, making aUSD fungible across Acala and Karura, right? So once those are joined together, the total debt ceiling will be higher than this, and yeah, and then 100K is a small fraction of the total debt ceiling. Yeah, and then and this risk parameter basically represents how much risk exposure there is for the protocol, and there's a number of factors that we consider when we're setting this number. Number one is where are the risks, right? So there's protocol risk because we're deploying, this is protocol to protocol, right? So the target protocol for this particular instance, it's Tiger protocol. For future deployments, if there's different protocol, then the protocol risk needs to be assessed as well. So there's protocol risk. There's also risk of other stablecoin that this 3 pool involves, which is USDC coming from Ethereum and also USDT coming from StateMine. And they could depeg, and for stablecoin that coming over from a bridge, there's also bridge risk as well. So, and then also if you actually deploy too much liquidity into the pool, it actually making the pool imbalance. So there is also the price impact of the amount as well. So then I think it's probably prudent to take this whole chunk as the maximum amount of the risk, right? So if everything goes wrong to the worst case scenario, then 100K is the total risk exposure to the protocol, and even that is still a very small amount, and also it doesn't quite impact the pool price very much as well. So so that recommendation coming from Ganglet, I think it's relatively conservative, but reasonable as a starting point for us to experiment in the space. So so in conclusion then, with that summary, I think IADS is actually quite a cool innovation that we introduced to actually taking in a lot of the safety measure. I think so far, since we've launched, we've predominantly focused on risk, very little on liquidity. And then we've been through at least 2 very dramatic price correction, both for DOT and KSM, and those corrections are between 50 to 90%. So it's very dramatic. So comparable to Black Thursdays back in the days. And the protocol has held up really well. The aUSD, still pegged relatively well, and all the risk measures, like the mechanisms, the liquidations, oracles, all perform as expected. And now that we're addressing another side of the coin, right? So risk is on one side, and then the credit or liquidity is another side. So I think this is a good, very healthy step forward for us to actually consider a new type of issuer to balance out both the risk as well as ability to actually scale and then provide more liquidity into the ecosystem. So hopefully that's a good summary for what we talked about yesterday. And then next, I will be addressing some of the questions that people have. So basically, I will be going through Slido for the questions on there in real life, pretending I'm on a live chat. Okay, so I'm just reading from the top questions, and then I will just be addressing them one after another. So the first one, will the 100K aUSD be paired with 100K USDC and 100K USDT, or is the aUSD minted being swapped into the pool? If the latter, isn't the loan only 66% backed? That's a good question. That's a common, I guess, myth with this approach. So let me break it down. First of all, the approach is the latter. So there will be 100K aUSD generated, and then it will get deposited into the pool, and then it will have 100K equivalent 3 USD, which is the LP token for the 3 pool, being put back into the Hong Kong stablecoin protocol and as backing for aUSD. So that's why the IADS is a different issuer than the CDP issuer. So the CDP issuer is using volatile crypto as backing, whereas the IADS issuer is using stable assets as backing. So you only need 1-to-1 for this to actually happen. And then for the second question, in terms of the mix of the backing. So let me use some analogy and also some similar models that's been used elsewhere, see if I can explain it, right? So for the second question, the 100K aUSD is fully backed by 3 USD. So fully means 100% backed by 3 USD LPs. How you think about this is it is similar to a flash loan. So think about you take out a flash loan, 100K aUSD, and then you add that 100K liquidity into the 3 pool to get 100K 3 USD. And then you use the 100K 3 USD as collateral to mint 100K aUSD. And then now you've got that, you use that to repay the flash loan 100K aUSD. Right, so this all happened in one transaction, right? So that's why when you get the flash loan, that's unbacked, right? And then you've performed the middle steps to actually deposit it into the pool and then get the LP, and then eventually you actually pay back the flash loan. So there is no outstanding flash loan. So there's no outstanding unbacked aUSD loans. So this is one analogy, see if you can get your head around. And then the second way to think about it is also in a way similar to D3M. So if you don't know what it is, we can probably share the link. So this is the direct deposit of DAI module that between Maker and Aave, right? Nothing is really new under the sun, I guess. So this is that model is where Maker would use a DAI. So this is the deposit receipt in Aave as backing to mint DAI to deposit into Aave at the first place. See if you can get that around. And that D3M is similar to D3M in two levels. One is it's protocol to protocol, right? So yeah, so there's the direct protocol to protocol scheme. And then the second way similar is using the deposit receipt as the backing for issuing new stablecoin, right? And in the two situations, they're all fully backed, right? And of course, the difference between IADS and D3M is obvious because IADS for stable swap has way lower risk exposure because it has no counterparty liquidation risk, right? If your counterparty is a money market, then it's a different risk parameter because the money market could get liquidated and then that will have an on-flow effect onto the aUSD protocol. So that's another sort of topic. We do have that in our roadmap in V2, I think, but that will be a different assessment for a different time to discuss. So for this particular proposal, it's only concerned of stable swap. Right? I hope that helps. Okay, so that's good. Right. So the second question is, what level of control does Tiger have over the funds in the pool? Right. So Tiger is a decentralized stable swap and also synthetic asset protocol built on Karura. There's an equivalent protocol called Tapio deployed on Acala. The protocol is actually built at the substrate level, so it's a substrate palette. I think both of them, they've got multiple versions now. So version 1 is a local version. Version 2 is an XCM enabled cross-chain version. Both of them are Web3 Foundation grant funded. I think the first grant has already been delivered and completed. And the second grant is still a work in progress and about to finish. So that is basically what Tiger and Tapio protocol is. So yeah, so that's effectively an on-chain decentralized stable swap. And in terms of control, I think LPs will have control over when you deposit and withdraw the funds. It's autonomous on-chain. And of course, there's also the user side that you can actually trade freely with different type of stablecoin. So I actually don't know whether I addressed that problem correctly or not, but if not, just feel free to kind of like ask another question, and then I'll get, if I can't answer, I'll get Terry from Tiger and Tapio protocol to answer that. Right. Another question is, does this mean that we can no longer call our stablecoin decentralized because a portion of our collateral will be centralized stablecoin? This is a brilliant question because this really gets us to think what are we trying to build here? What's our goal? Is our goal to achieve total utopia type of decentralization, or are we trying to solve some problems that we're currently facing, or a system that we're trying to escape per se? I think that's really where the line is drawn, right? Because decentralization is really a spectrum. There's no black and white, because well, even if you look at Bitcoin, sure, it's you can say it's probably fully autonomous, but decentralized. It still has a GitHub repo. There's a team to actually kind of have to push the changes onto the chain, and there's also a tending towards centralization of miners, right? So there's always a degree when you talk about decentralization. This is also the same for protocols, right? So the classic DeFi 1.0 protocols like Compound, Aave, Maker, they are technically DeFi, but each one of them already have centralized assets, right? So they have real world assets that's been added to Aave and Maker. And then I think Aave also has under collateralized loans being issued. And so there's a degree of the credit they issue as a mixture of how decentralized it is, right? And if we do need to think maybe in the number terms, then maybe this way you can kind of classify it. So let's say if you're adding 0.3% of the debt ceiling for USDT of USDC, which is the centralized or fiat-backed stablecoin, then in terms of the asset part of the protocol, then you are 99.8% decentralized, right? But this doesn't, the asset part of the decentralization doesn't change the fact that your protocol is still autonomous, it still works in a decentralized way, right? And how do you judge like where you draw the line? You can almost think about this like a chart where you plot different parameters, right? So how decentralized is your risk, right? So effectively, your backings, your different issuer type is a classification of risk, right? So then that's one parameter, is how decentralized you want all your risk to be. If you stay only on the crypto spectrum, surely you're serving the crypto users only, right? Because the CDP, the crypto pure issuer, credit issuer, you only serve a very small group of people where they can take their crypto asset, turn it into stables, and then off-ramp. Or they probably do fancy stuff like further trading and other advanced trading activities. But all in all, you're only serving that a small group of people. But when you look at ultimately what we're trying to achieve in Web3, at least what we are trying to achieve here from Acala's perspective is, are we trying to aim for pure decentralization? Is that the goal? Or are we trying to make life slightly better in the ways that we can? Make life better in a way that the system is more transparent, autonomous, open, traceable, and have a bit more sovereign control from individuals, and have more say in how we actually control our activities and transactions, right? You can see the different questions or different goal that we're setting for ourselves. You end up very different different choices, I guess, or compromises you're going to make, right? So when if we actually choose something that's actually more tangible rather than utopia, I think it's very dangerous if we all be very extreme and go for very utopian and idealistic goals, because this actually becomes very exclusive. Like if you're not look exactly like this, then you're not allowed, right? You're not allowed to say this. You're not allowed to include this type of activity, regardless whether you make life better or worse, right? So I think that's actually kind of very dangerous, not only from a technology perspective, but also from just generally how human society progress is also very dangerous if you go to a very extreme like bubble that we live in, or a bubble that we create that we live in it ourselves, right? So I think it's healthier and a little bit more inclusive and welcoming when we ask the more, I guess, tangible question is, what problem we're trying to solve, and also how we actually make life doesn't have to be dramatic, but slightly better, right? So if that's the goal, if all we want to do is make things more autonomous, transparent, open, traceable, and also keeping the right parties accountable, right? I think those are very important, and I think those are actually the right attributes to look at, if we are trying to counter the big problems we had in the financial world. For example, like 2008, the financial crisis, where things are very opaque, right? The systems are closed. It's all operating black box. That's why those derivatives are wrapped one after another, and nobody actually knows where the risk is, and it's nowhere can be traceable, right? So from people outside of Goldman Sachs or those big banks, from people outside like myself, I will have no way to trace the financial product that I bought. Where did the money end up, and how things are being managed and processed. And then also nobody is accountable, because otherwise we wouldn't need a bailout, right? So and then no one is accountable, because when things collapse, you're essentially just sitting there and waiting for a bailout, and effectively who's bailing them out is actually the people are bailing them out, right? If that's the situation that we want to improve and try to get out of, and try to make new systems or improve the current systems, if those are the goals, and more transparent, more open, more traceable, more accountable, then I think the current DeFi 1.0 protocols like Maker, Aave, Compound, Acala included, we fit into that picture, right? So on-chain activity provide transparency. Protocols are autonomous, right? So when the financial instruments are getting collapsed, the price collapse, the liquidation happened, the risk management part happened autonomously, and it keeps the protocol solvent. I think solvency is very important to keep the sanity, I guess, for the overall system. Things are traceable, and anything you do, you can actually track what's going on, what's happening, and different parties are accountable, right? That's very hard to do in the real world out there, but on the on-chain protocols, that's kind of a building feature, right? If you manage your vault, you manage your risk, you are accountable. If you don't manage it well and you encounter liquidation, there's a penalty, right? And then your collateral could be gone, like if you don't actually manage it well, in order to pay back the outstanding debt, right? So if there's people borrowing, there's people lending, well, there's no people lending, there's people borrowing, and then those people are accountable for the risk that they took on, and there's a consequences if you don't do that, in order to keep the protocol and the system solvent at the end of the day for everybody, right? So if that's the goal, then I think what we are doing here is only strengthening those properties by increasing the utility of aUSD and the Acala credit system to a wider sort of audience and wider utility across different parts of the system, not just to financial systems, but also to other type of protocol that can use it as medium of exchange and other type of usage, right? So yeah, so then for IADS, it's the same, right? For IADS, this new issue is the same. It is transparent. You can actually track exactly what's going on. It is open. It is traceable. There's accountability as well, right? So if things goes wrong, so at the back of it, there's always some backing. That's most important, is one-to-one backing, fully backed. So that's one thing. And then if things do go wrong, it did end up as bad debt, and then the treasurer will have to kind of absorb it, right? So this probably leads to another good question that I saw on the forum, right? On the forum, there's someone asked, so on the forum, someone asked about the bad debt situation, right? So what happened if there's potential losses, and then what happened to the treasury to absorb it. How does it mean for Acala being backed by this 3 USD versus the CDP, right? So this person wants to know, can you confirm that user collateral in Acala protocol will be completely segregated from this loan and will never be used to repay any directly generated aUSD, right? So let me address this. aUSD issued via CDP or aUSD issued via IADS, they will have their own risk exposure. So they are essentially two instruments or two issuers to issue aUSD credit. And then they have their own risk and they have different ways to protect themselves, right? In the CDP situation, if CDP issued aUSD credit, it's over-collateralized with crypto assets. The loans will be liquidated at certain threshold. So they will sell off the collateral for aUSD and then to pay back the outstanding debt. So if you generated 100K aUSD, you've got collateral over there. If the liquidation threshold is being met, then the collateral will be sold in order to pay back the 100K aUSD that you've generated. And then, of course, in most cases, right, the system will handle all of the risk because the loans will be over-collateralized. The liquidation ratio is always above 100%, so 120%, 150%, depends on which collateral it is. It is likely to be, you'll be able to obtain sufficient aUSD by selling the collateral when liquidation happen, pay back the debt plus the liquidation penalty. So this is most cases, right? So however, remember Black Thursday, right? So there is extreme market condition, the market spiral down, you trigger liquidation. In the liquidation, what do? You continue to sell off the collaterals that probably push the market continue downwards. And the sold collaterals, it could happen, the sold collaterals may not be able to pay back outstanding debt, which will result in bad debt, right? So what that means is like, you've got, used to be 150K worth of crypto collaterals, and then you've borrowed 100K aUSD. And then when extreme condition happen, you're trying to sell, when the price fall down to maybe 130 a point. But as you're trying to auction it off or sell it on an exchange, the price continues to drop, and then it gone over the 100% collateral ratio. So now your collateral, the used to be 150K worth of collateral, now only worth, let's say, 100K, right? So, and then you also incur, let's say 10K of penalty, then, 10K plus 100K outstanding debt, it's 110K total debt that you owe to the protocol. All the collaterals there, even you sell it at a current price, you wouldn't be able to pay it back, right? And then what do you do then? So as a vault owner, you didn't safeguard the vault, then those collaterals will be sold off in a way, and then trying to pay back the debt. But even so, the outstanding debt is still not enough, right? The sold collateral will still not be able to pay back the outstanding debt. And in that case, it will result in a bad debt in the system, right? So this is essentially, I think what's mentioned in the proposal is like, there could be a situation where, everything is, gone haywire and you couldn't actually pay back the debt, and there could be bad debt, right? So unpaid stablecoin in the system. But also, this is also a time where aUSD will be in high demand because everybody is trying to get hold of aUSD to actually pay down the debt, right? So this is the CDP, the crypto over-collateralization issuer, if you like, the situation for them. And then for IADS, it doesn't actually have a similar level of risks because stablecoin doesn't fluctuate as much as normal crypto, right? And then with the LP token, you actually further sealed from the disparity. And also, so, there's no need for a vault management for IADS, and hence IADS is probably a complementary issuer to CDP, that it balances out the volatility, and also it's a different risk profile, right? So if you look at a credit system, then you have different chunks of risk to issue credit. Then you want them to be complementary. You don't want them to move in the same direction and the same magnitude, right? So that means, yes, when it goes to going up the direction, all happy days, but when it comes down, it's cascading down. That's bad, right? So you almost want things like moving to different directions. Like if something goes up, you hope the other risks that are going flat or goes the other direction doesn't correlate essentially. So in either of the situation, if the protocol ended up with some bad debt, right? So unpaid stablecoin, then the treasury will need to absorb it, right? So either auction off some ACLKR, or if the CDP manages to collect some collaterals, then you auction off collaterals to repay the debt, right? So this do happen when a lot of liquidation happen, but usually it can be absorbed by being able to auction off some of the collaterals that's being collected by the protocol, and then we've also implemented multiple levels of liquidation to actually, I guess, have soft landing, right? So I think when a DeFi 1.0 protocol came out back in the Black Thursday days, it was very brutal, right? Oracle didn't work, the chain got congested, so you got really bad price for your collateral. So you weren't able to, the protocol weren't able to recoup the debt to pay back. But we've been through two of those similar magnitude of market condition, and then the liquidation happened, very normally. Oracle seems to perform fine. There were bad debt, but we also collected collaterals that were able to be auctioned off later on to actually pay back the debt, right? So, and then this also, kind of introduce sort of different ways to manage risk, and hopefully that's more, robust and dynamic for the system to both expand, but also within range of risk framework that we have. Okay, so that's a long-winded answer to that. Yes, so so hopefully I answered the last question for decentralization. So I think there's a degree of decentralization is all about choice, right? So I think as long as we achieve the goals that I mentioned, then having different type of risk, as long as it's transparent and everyone understands what's the associated risk with it, then it's essentially a choice to be made, right? Right. So, okay. So another person asked the question, my main concern is the bad debt and the risk if USDC, USDT have issue, then aUSD have an issue too. Can you explain more? Yeah, hopefully, well, from the last two questions, then people would know how much is the risk, right? So you can be very extreme by taking no risk, right? So we shouldn't even do CDP if you don't want to take risk, because if you do the crypto back issuer, even you are over collateralized, right? The price could also drop much faster than you liquidate. So there's still risk exposure. You could still end up with a little bit of bad debt. So with our three sort of level of cushion of liquidation, the probability of that happen is very, very low. Even it happened, there's still, last resort ways to kind of repay the bad debt, but still, if you want to be very extreme, the world ends and then all the liquidation, couldn't pay back the outstanding stablecoin, then you still end up with bad debt, right? So you can't sit on the camp of let's take no risk and then we do nothing. So we don't need to do any of this, because by having a credit system is you quantify the risk and then you issue credit, right? So this is one aspect to it. And then the second thing is, at this stage, we're still very early. So we're basically taking the entire thing as the full risk. So when we say we have a ceiling of 100K, like put into the stable swap, we say that's the entire risk exposure, right? So normally when you quantify risk, you would take the amount and then times the probability of how how the probability of bad things will happen, and that you end up with a risk, which is a smaller amount. But in our case, we take the extremely prudent approach to say the entire 100K is our risk exposure. And if that did happen, are we able to survive, right? Essentially, if there is 100K bad debt, can we survive? And the answer is yes, right? We are able to kind of provide for that 100K bad debt if we end up in that situation, right? And then I will actually ask a different question, is like, then 100K is very small, and then how can you grow? So this is actually on-chain constraint, which is good for us, because only when a protocol continue to grow and then you have sufficient treasury to actually protect for your bad debt, then you want to kind of gradually increase the risk that you can take on, right? So the protocol at its current state is probably going to stay at 100K for quite a while, until it kind of grow organically to a certain size before sort of the next issuance will be looked at all. So yeah, so I think your concern is valid, but I think it's good to understand, the quantifying the risk and then make a decision on whether you want to take on a risk or not, or how you mitigate the risk. Right, so what benefits do IADS provide to users? Yeah, so good questions. So if you're only looking at IADS of its own, it's a protocol to protocol, right? But there's indirect benefits, because once we provide liquidity into the stable swap pools, then the user benefit. Why? There's a number of things. If you are a vault owner, right, is essentially new liquidity that are available in the stable swap pool. So when there's low liquidity, you can get a cheaper aUSD. So you can use USDC or USDT to actually obtain aUSD to maintain the healthiness of your aUSD vault. And then for aUSD holders and users, because of this increased level of liquidity and also multiple liquidity venues, right? So there will be 3 pools on Acala side and Karura side, and this actually creates much better trading activities between the two, and also which will in turn make the price more stable, right? So as a holder, then it's also beneficial to you. And then the third thing is, as a user, then you have multiple ways to on and off ramp, right? So aUSD is listed on KuCoin. You can certainly on and off ramp there, but now you've got counterparts of USDC and USDT, right? So if you don't want to do it that way, you can certainly use these assets to on and off ramp, right? You almost look at, like, I think people like group all the stable coins into one and say, this is the stable coin. They do one thing, they're stable, but not quite, because I look at USDC and USDT fiat backed as rails, right? And aUSD DAI, they are credit systems. So essentially they function very differently. So rails means you do on-ramp, off-ramp very easily. So if you want to go on from fiat to crypto and crypto to fiat, they may be one of the mechanisms, like they're rails, right? So like rails is like bridges, right? That you can bring asset from one side to the other. Whereas DAI and aUSD, they are more like credit systems, right? They're like, I guess in a way, banks that you can issue those credit out, right? So they actually function quite differently. So sometimes it is, slightly unfair to try to compare the two in the same category, because they do have overlaps as medium of exchange, but they also have their own purposes. Like one is serving as rails and the other as credit systems, because then crypto users can then generate credit, and then they can actually use the rails to pay for things or off ramp and do other stuff, right? And vice versa. So hopefully that helps. So overall, yeah, benefits is a lot more liquidity, and that helps users to actually use aUSD, because when you only have a credit system and you don't have liquidity, you don't have enough credit out there for people to obtain it, to get rid of it, to on-ramp, to off-ramp, then it's less usable in terms of the usability side of the things. Yeah. And of course, it's cheaper as well. So if you're a user, hopefully so far, you are also an ACA and KR holder, right? So and ACA and KR, they are non-inflationary. So we don't do the printing business right now to print our token and give it out to people. And we do give incentive, but those are actually hardcore tokens, right? And with IADS, it's protocol-owned liquidity. So it's effectively cheaper, more cost-effective, and also more sustainable for us to provide liquidity that way, rather than you just rent, essentially just throw a lot of incentive at people and then you rent the liquidity. We do both, right? The reason being the IADS is a very small scale, right? For a number of reasons. One is very new. Two, there's only that much risk, new risk we can take on. So it's going to be small and then also grow very gradually, right? So we're doing both, but hopefully it will get to a stage where this can help sustainable liquidity provision throughout the ecosystem. Yep. The last one. Are there any plans in replicating the success of Hong Kong aUSD loans into, for example, minting Acala British pound or Acala euro, etc., with aUSD as collateral, and forex volume is massive? I mean, by design, these are all possible, right? So these are just like, now we can have different issuer. So they're kind of modular, right? So you can think about a CDP issuer, IADS issuer, and potentially you can have new issuer that are even coded as protocol or entity. They can issue new credits out, right? So these are modular. And then issuing different type of credit in different currencies. I think technically that is certainly possible. It's more of a matter of demand and also real use case, and also where the users, or where the I guess utility of those credit systems would need, right? Rather than more coming from an innovation or builder's perspective. So yeah, so technically it's all possible. It's more of like where the product market fit, where the demand is what we will be looking at. So and that's the end of the Slido Q&A. So I think I've spent an hour or so on this. So hopefully the answers are thorough. And if you still have outstanding questions, do feel free to pop those questions on the Slido, and then we can continue to answer those. Yeah. And thanks for everyone tuning in and spending the time. So appreciate all of that. Thank you.